So in the end, is it still about regime change? Is Israel still insisting on regime change? Well, that's actually pretty unrealistic. Trump seems pretty confident about it. Now that we've talked to them, they're ready to kneel and accept it. So we give them another 10 days. But even if you dodge it now, you can't dodge it forever. What happens after those 10 days? If at that point you give them another 15 or 20 days of grace, then America's momentum will be seriously weakened, and that's going to be a real problem. So after those 10 days, by April 6th, there must be action, and there must be concrete results.
A lot of these AI-generated videos are kind of mocking Trump, saying he's using rocket launchers to attack, then planning to bomb Hark Island, but then not daring to do it. Then he negotiates with someone who doesn't even exist and claims he's won. But anyway, the situation right now is really complicated, and you can't really blame Trump for it. In fact, I think the U.S.-Israel coalition has already dealt a pretty heavy blow to the Iranian regime militarily. I've seen reports saying that within the Iranian regime, there's a big conflict between the president's faction and the Revolutionary Guard's faction. It's even said that the president's side told the Revolutionary Guard that if they can't reach an agreement, Iran's economy could collapse in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. So what do you think are the chances of regime change in Iran? Because a lot of people say that in the end, the real solution is regime change.
So the ultimate goal definitely has to be to overthrow the regime in Tehran. The question is, who's going to do it? Do the U.S. ground forces have that capability? If the U.S. and Israel keep carrying out these airstrikes, can they actually achieve the concrete result of toppling the regime? This can only happen if there's internal civilian power combined with factions within the Islamic regime. So why is that? To be able to achieve this, the economy would have to be completely paralyzed. Then it depends on how much endurance the remaining regime in Tehran actually has. Because even if the whole country starves, like in 1958, when 30 million people died of hunger, Mao Zedong still had plenty to eat. At that time, you see, how much hardship can the Iranian people actually endure? So that's another level of the problem. I believe Iran's economy can't hold out. It just can't. So all they can do is stir up nationalist sentiment. Now, how much power does the Revolutionary Guard still have inside Iran? We also can't underestimate the influence they've built up over nearly half a century. Their extreme ideology has brainwashed an entire generation, maybe even 2 in Iran. In rural areas and small towns, the Revolutionary Guard and the Bajik militia have deeply infiltrated and control society. They're present in factories, local street committees, and schools. Plus, there's an older group, those who were young during the 1979 Iranian Revolution, who took to the streets to support Khomeini and cheered for Iran's liberation. Now, these bad guys have grown old. Today, these retirees can be seen all over Iran, sitting on stools, fanning themselves, relaxing under trees, drinking tea. When they see the younger generation's pro-American ideas, watching American movies, longing for the West, influenced by social media, they just shake their heads. These old folks, scattered everywhere, still support the Revolutionary Guard because of the deep brainwashing and infiltration of extreme ideology in their generation. So, how many of them are there? That's why there's a generational conflict inside Iran. The young people, especially those in Tehran, are very supportive of the U.S. and hope America will come liberate them soon. If U.S. troops ever enter Tehran, these young people would be the ones leading the way for them. But in Iran's countryside, among the general population, the Revolutionary Guard's control is still strong. And the older generation, those who supported Khomeini's Islamic Revolution and were seriously brainwashed, still have significant resistance power. We don't really know how many of them there are. On top of that, there's also this wave of nationalism, like imperialists are bullying us again, Israel and the U.S. are out to get us, so we can't give in now, these kinds of ideas. These older folks still have a certain ability to stir people up. There are so many mosques everywhere, and these places have become hotbeds for their extreme ideas to take root and spread. So right now, we don't really know how much influence they have, but among the people, this still serves as a strong spiritual force for resistance. So right now, we just don't know. Even if all the missiles and drones are used up, and even if you change the regime, can that new regime really hold on? Based on the current situation, if the exiled king in the United States returns to lead a new regime, can that new government really bring lasting peace? Without a doubt, this new regime would be seen by the remaining Iranian nationalist forces as nothing more than an American puppet and lackey. That would just lead to endless problems down the line, of course. As far as Israel is concerned, none of this matters to them anymore. As long as you've lost the ability to produce nuclear weapons and medium to long-range missiles, they'll let it go. But there are still other remnants to deal with. Even now, if you try to transport about 30% of your oil over land through the Red Sea, then what about Yemen? The Houthi terrorist forces are also constantly launching missiles at you. So now, when it comes to Yemen and Hezbollah and Lebanon, these two terrorist forces, which are essentially Iran's proxies, those branches also need to be completely eliminated. Up to today, Iran's true nature has been fully exposed. It really is a tremendous threat to the entire Middle East region. I think there are both moral and practical reasons for launching this war. There's no need to even say it. Now, with the entire Strait of Hormuz being blockaded, it's basically Iran challenging the whole world. So where is international law now? You could say that when Trump and Israel launched their strikes, it was a violation of international law. But now Iran is also violating international law, and their actions are even more serious than the bombing of Tehran back then. So the entire world order has now fallen into a state of speechlessness, a state of being at a loss for words. Originally, China could have played a role at this time, but up to now, China's attitude has been extremely passive, just waiting and waiting, with Trump coming in mid-May. So if you want to take this opportunity to rebuild a new world order and point the way forward for humanity, then now you should be showing humanity a direction. Where exactly does China stand, right? But in this regard, it seems like we can't see anything either. So as for Iran, it said that whether or not they will let Chinese oil tankers pass and whether they can allow them to pass in the long term, that's still an unknown.
Actually, I have two pieces of news that I wanted to report to you, and then see what you think about them. First, yesterday, which was Friday, two Chinese oil tankers wanted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz and reported to Iran, but Iran refused. So Iran denied passage to two Chinese oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, which surprised everyone a bit. In the past, Iran was always said to be friends with the U.S. and Israel's enemies, but now they're not even letting China through. Why is that? Second, the former U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, gave an interview and directly said, "In the eyes of Iran and Venezuela, China is now what he called in English a freak of friend. The Chinese translation would be something like mutated or unreliable, but I think what he really means is an unreliable friend, right? That's the idea. You're an unreliable friend." So what do you think about this? Why would Iran block these Chinese ships? And why is the Chinese Communist Party now completely ineffective diplomatically? He said he never expected the CCP to get involved militarily, but even diplomatically, they haven't played any role at all. They're just staying silent.
Because for a long time, China's domestic propaganda has used really exaggerated tactics, making it seem like Iran, Russia, and China are now the three ironclad brothers. Add Kim Jong-un's North Korea, and together we form an anti-American core. If a world war breaks out, the four brothers will win. This kind of propaganda tone and language is just way over the top. We all know that behind closed doors, a lot of it is just lip service and not backed up by real action. It's just like when they claim that thanks to China's mediation, Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states achieved a great reconciliation. So, Israel, you'd better watch out in the future. You'd better be on guard. But now you realize that this so-called reconciliation is completely just a castle in the air, an illusion with no substance. So why is Iran treating China this way? Of course, China knows deep down that it's because Iran thinks that right now, the aid you're giving me is nowhere near what I'm asking for. But China, on the other hand, used to promote that it had signed this 25-year, $400 billion agreement with Iran, which was supposed to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But has this $400 billion actually been delivered? Over all these years, with this $400 billion from China, you were supposed to help Iran build military ports, including the Tehran subway or high-speed rail within Iran. For China, when we first signed this massive 25-year, $400 billion aid plan, the news was announced and a lot of people in China were really excited. But how exactly is this $400 billion going to be implemented in stages? I'm not saying you're going to give all $400 billion at once. That's just not possible. Of course, it has to be done in stages. I give you a little bit and see how you implement it. Are there any local officials involved in corruption? If you're corrupt and China sees it and isn't satisfied, then we'll have to renegotiate the deal. Over all these years, there have definitely been a lot of conflicts between China and Iran regarding this massive $400 billion aid plan. Iran is definitely not satisfied. But all these follow-up issues and later developments, China won't report on them. On top of that, when it comes to military technology, what's needed most right now is weapons. It's not like when the war first broke out and we saw on Douyin and other Chinese media, there was this Chinese influencer hyping up these so-called low-altitude supersonic missiles that could supposedly scare off American aircraft carriers like they were dumplings.
Isn't that right?
On the very first day the fighting started, this idea was already going viral on Chinese social media. They're not afraid of this kind of footage at all. Iran's secret weapon is this Chinese-made supersonic low-altitude missile. They're not afraid of the U.S., whether it's the Lincoln or the Ford. But has this missile actually been delivered yet? No, it hasn't. They're still negotiating, apparently in the final stages. So, given the current situation, will China dare, does it even dare, to openly deliver a batch of these low-altitude supersonic missiles to Iran? Will they dare or not?
Even if they do deliver them, it probably won't make much difference. Didn't Trump say so? Just a couple of days ago, Trump mentioned at a meeting that 101 missiles were fired at the Lincoln. He said they were extremely fast, but not a single one hit the target. Then he proudly said, "I watched these young people operating everything," right? Did you see that part of his speech? Some people are saying that maybe some of those missiles were Chinese-made.
Yeah, that's why Israel is also talking tough now. They've said that any country that provides Iran with military resources or helps them deliver missiles is an enemy of Israel. And Netanyahu can't hold back anymore. Originally, China and Israel had a pretty good relationship, and a lot of China's military technology and capabilities, besides what they get from the U.S., have actually been provided directly or indirectly by Israel. But now Netanyahu has finally seen things clearly. Of course, China's military strength, whether it's a dragon or a snake, will also be exposed in this war. On one hand, you say you're not afraid, but now we see the U.S. being dragged down and tightly held by Iran, and America's real strength is being revealed. So now, those who used to talk tough like wolf warriors are banging their bowls, saying, see, the U.S. is nothing special. But at the same time, the world is also seeing just how much military support China can actually provide to Iran through so-called aid. Both sides are being exposed now, right? So the truth will have to stand the test of time. As for Iran's attitude toward Chinese ships in the Strait of Hormuz, whether China is Iran's enemy or friend in the future, it's still not entirely clear.
Yes. I think this is really interesting. Today, they made it very clear you can't pass through. They specifically told them we're a Chinese ship, and they replied you can't go through. So I think maybe one reason is that they're really dissatisfied with China's radar systems. Wasn't there talk about China's anti-stealth radar? Iran has deployed a lot of those, but maybe they didn't work as expected from the start, and that could be something Iran is unhappy about. Plus, China hasn't really helped much diplomatically either. So now it's Pakistan that's mediating, and this time China hasn't jumped in to mediate, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, but how can you really rely on Pakistan? Now China wants to show the world the way forward, to rebuild a new world order. This is supposed to be the best time for China to play a role, since there's a vacuum globally right now. But over these past few weeks, the whole world has seen that China hasn't really done much, including Iran. So, will the relationship between China and Iran end up like China and Vietnam? Back then, they called each other comrades and brothers, hyped it up a lot, but eventually turned against each other. It was the same with China and Albania, and actually with North Korea too. On the surface, they seemed close, but deep down they weren't. So once all this propaganda smoke clears, what we're left with is just reality.
Former ambassador to China, Burns, specifically mentioned in an interview that when China brokered the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, they made a point to send him a message. The implication was, look, we mediated this, now we're a major power in the Middle East too. He said they deliberately sent him that message. But now, with this latest round of events, he says it's been a huge blow to China's international credibility.
Exactly. So now, never mind brokering peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, why don't you first try mediating with Yemen's so-called Houthi movement? Tell them to stop launching missiles from the other side of the Strait of Hormuz and over in the Red Sea. If you can mediate that, it's already pretty impressive, right? So in this area, there's not much to see either, is there? Now, if you look at the Red Sea in Yemen, there's a chance they'll stir up trouble too. They can launch sporadic attacks, and these attacks would coordinate with Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, plus the influence of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So this is a real headache for Israel. Now, the rallying call has sounded, and for the EU, you have no choice but to act, because even the Houthis in Yemen have joined the fight, dragging all of Saudi Arabia into it. Even though the EU is extremely dissatisfied with Trump, how can you not get involved now, right? Okay, but if you do get involved, how much can you really contribute? So you have to decide to set aside your grumbling and dissatisfaction with Trump as an internal issue for now. Right now, you still have to listen to Trump and unite all of NATO. Don't worry about China, India, or Japan. Right now, the entire world order is being challenged. This is an unprecedented challenge. So where does Europe stand right now? If you don't get involved in this war, the first to decline will be Europe itself.
Even the UAE, I've seen that one of their senior advisors is on social media specifically addressing Europe, basically saying, if you don't take action, we will. So now it seems like the UAE and Saudi Arabia might join in actions against Iran. I don't know to what extent. Maybe they'll join the escort missions, or maybe even the island assault operations, or something else. But militarily, Saudi Arabia and the UAE might get involved to some degree.
They might have to get involved to some extent. It's almost unavoidable. So in the long run, this war is either going to be against the West or against Iran. External forces outside of Iran are actually a good thing, because Iran is basically acting like Empress Dowager Cixi back in the day, declaring war on all the nations, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But for Iran, that's just completely unrealistic. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are three levels. The first is the United States, the second is Israel, and the third is the Middle Eastern countries, led by Saudi Arabia. And then there's a fourth level, which is the EU and NATO. So right now, Trump still has a lot of cards in his hand. He could say to Saudi Arabia, what do you want to do? I'm done here. I'm leaving. You take care of this mess. Besides the economic challenge of the Strait of Hormuz, the conflict between Sunnis and Shiites is only going to intensify in the future. This will be a huge threat to the entire Arab world and the whole Islamic world. So what should Saudi Arabia do? You're one of the richest countries in the world, right? Trump could say, I'm fighting this war for you too. Look at the EU. They're just sitting on the sidelines. So what are you going to do? Shouldn't you send troops? Shouldn't you form an alliance with Israel to take down Iran? I think the U.S. should take a more proactive approach with Saudi Arabia and persuade them to get involved, because Saudi Arabia itself has military strength. They have missiles too.
As of today, it's not that the U.S. wants Saudi Arabia to be more proactive. It's actually Saudi Arabia that's very eager for the U.S. not to stop. According to media reports, the Saudi crown prince called Trump several times last week, urging him not to stop, and even said he could send ground troops into Iran to push for regime change.
Yeah, exactly. So the US is like, all right, if we're not sending troops, then you go ahead and send yours. That's the situation right now. With all these technological changes, this is really just the beginning. So we can't say that the US has lost the war. Right now, Trump is already struggling to deal with this ever-changing situation. Saudi Arabia and those Gulf countries haven't even responded yet. So everyone is confused. Nobody really understands what's going on. Why would Iran attack Saudi Arabia and Dubai, those Gulf countries, right? That's an extremely foolish move. It's like inviting the 8-nation alliance in, and out of those 8 countries, 4 are actually your own Islamic brothers, though they're from different factions. So if things keep going like this, Iran is basically in the same position as Empress Dowager Shishi in 1900. How long can they hold out? Let me ask you, with these missiles and drones, if you keep dragging this out, that's why Trump extended the deadline by another 10 days to see what Saudi Arabia's attitude will be, to see if Iran will keep stalling for another 10 days. Maybe after those 10 days, it'll be another 10 days. If by then Saudi Arabia takes a more proactive stance, Trump might say, Europe is dragging its feet. If they're not coming, then you step up. Trump can put pressure on Saudi Arabia, like, you want me not to take action? I can't do that. The left wing of the Democratic Party at home wants me to stop, but if I don't, maybe you should step in, right? Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. forming a new alliance. A few years ago, this would have been unimaginable, really unimaginable. So now a new world order is emerging, is now breaking through the surface. This isn't something that can be changed by anyone's will. So now, after all these years of making grand statements about guiding humanity and building a new world order, with such bold claims, now the whole world is waiting for China to take action. That's why the significance of this war, its historical importance, is extremely profound, no less than that of World War II.
It has exposed the true colors of many parties in many areas.
America will not be defeated. Last time I asked, what do you mean by America being defeated? How do you define defeat? If America is defeated this time, it would be like World War II. Did Churchill and Roosevelt lose? What were the consequences of that? That would mean Hitler's Germany swept across Europe and then expanded its influence around the world. His colonial power would have spread. After that, German would have become the primary language of the West, not English. This is what defeat for the West means. This is what defeat for Britain and America means. If the United States were to lose this so-called war, then in the future, we would see the renminbi replacing the US dollar, right? But today, we really don't see anything like that happening. Now, China can say, we're taking the lead. We'll just settle with Iran directly in renminbi. And Saudi Arabia has also said, we're using renminbi with China now. So can the share of renminbi settlements in the international market take this opportunity to increase? Is it possible to gradually squeeze the US dollar out of the international monetary and economic circle? This is what people call America's defeat, right? In the future, China's influence, or China together with Russia, will dominate the world. That's what they mean by America's defeat. Do you really think that's possible? Is it? So if America were truly defeated right now, would Saudi Arabia be betting everything on Trump's America? Would they be telling America, don't stop? Or would Saudi Arabia be stepping in to mediate, saying, stop, call a ceasefire, don't fight anymore? And then they have their own calculations. Looks like America can't be relied on anymore. After this war, we still need to stick closer together with China. What else? The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is about to hold an emergency meeting, right? Isn't the SCO meeting about to take place now? This is called the New World Order, with China leading the formation of this new situation. But none of this has happened yet, up to today. So where is this New World Order? If the new order is broken now, it's still the U.S. that calls the shots.
I know your time is tight, so let me ask you one last question. What's your view on the upcoming Trump-Xi meeting in mid-May? A lot of people say that Trump actually doesn't need to meet with Xi Jinping, that it seems pointless. What's your take?
The Trump-Xi meeting isn't that significant because its significance depends on the meeting itself. Previously, China played a mediating role in the Iran war. The more actively China mediates, the continuation or end of this war, China is a key factor. In that case, a Trump-Xi meeting would be very meaningful. But as you can see, China is keeping a very low profile right now. They're even detaining Chinese ships in the Strait of Hormuz and not letting them go. So whether the Trump-Xi meeting happens at the end of this month or next month, it really doesn't mean much. So I think Trump has seen through this as well. Why should I show up for a Trump-Xi meeting just to give you a platform? What am I supposed to exchange? Are we supposed to talk about tariffs? That's something that's being discussed at the level of Lighthizer and He-Lithing. And didn't you already agree to that? You said you'd buy my soybeans, but in the blink of an eye, another 3 months have gone by. How much have you actually paid out of those tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So by mid-May, when the Trump-Xi meeting was supposed to happen, Trump was going to Beijing. He wanted to check the books. You promised to buy them, my soybeans. Now it's been almost a whole quarter. 3 more months have passed. How much money has actually been paid? This is also a pressure on China. How are you going to explain this to the U.S.? Or are you just going to try to muddle through again at that time and keep dragging things out? So it's pretty unlikely that the Trump-Xi meeting will actually happen in mid-May. But the attitude of the U.S. this time is also unusual. Whether he's talking about the Trump-Xi meeting or not, he said that at the end of the year, he still wants to invite Xi Jinping and his wife to Washington, D.C. But why announce something for the end of the year when the Trump-Xi meeting hasn't even happened yet? He really wants to help Xi Jinping consolidate his power in China right now. He's actually giving Xi Jinping a hand. Why would he want to help him out? That's something worth thinking about. Because in Trump's eyes, having Xi Jinping stay in power is beneficial to the United States, right? Could he have this kind of strategic plan? He wants regime change in Iran, but he doesn't necessarily want a power struggle in China. He doesn't necessarily want a change in leadership. So why is that exactly? A lot of people already understand this in their hearts, right? So this attitude toward China is also very unusual. It's not normal. The Trump administration didn't even know if there would be any results. Why do they insist on inviting you over at the end of the year? So when it comes to Trump, what he says doesn't really count. He just talks a lot of nonsense, says all kinds of things. This is more like promotional language, not the language of real strategic intent. That's why so many countries around the world can't figure him out. He could just as easily say in May that he's not going anymore. So what's this about the end of the year? That could just blow away with the wind. He could flip-flop at any moment, change his mind just like flipping a pancake. So the world is getting more and more interesting, more and more unpredictable. You can't just say that Trump doesn't keep his word. It's just that you can't see what cards he's holding. And a lot of people can't see him either. In fact, he might not have any cards at all. He's just playing it by ear, crossing the river by feeling for stones as he goes. That's part of it too. So I have to emphasize again, we must avoid war. Once war breaks out, how it escalates or spreads, no one, not even God, can control that. Back then, when Japan attacked China, they claimed they would conquer China in 3 months. They never expected it would drag on for 8 years. They didn't expect they'd end up having to launch a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, or that they'd have to fight in Southeast Asia, or that it would eventually lead to the atomic bomb. When they said they'd defeat China in 3 months, they never imagined that one day there would be battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, or that the whole country would be mobilized for things like the kamikaze attacks. So don't talk lightly about starting a war. Once a war starts, the consequences are terrifying. Even today, we can't be sure whether a future war might end with nuclear weapons. Who can say for sure, right?
No matter what, I think Trump is still, just like when Sine Takaichi visited the US and told Trump, she said, "I believe you are the only person in the world who can maintain world peace." I don't think she was just being polite. It's said that she thought for a long time on the plane about how to say this to Trump. And in the end, she came up with this line. From Trump's true intentions, I think his core belief is that he doesn't want these wars. So whether his tactics are heavy-handed or light, I think strategically he really does have this kind of strategic thinking. Of course, as for whether he has no cards left to play, I don't really think that's the case. But like you said, he will keep adjusting his strategy, and I think that's definitely true.
Whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, America's bottom line is to maintain its global hegemony. As for building a new world order that excludes the U.S., that's a goal China has made clear for a long time. Remember back in Alaska when Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi met with Blinken? They told Blinken, from today on, you can't talk down to China like this anymore. Do you remember that confidence they had? That's right.
Speaking from a position of strength?
If Trump or Rubio came to China, would they dare repeat what was said to Blinken in Alaska? Would they? So back then, you could see that Blinken was just a bookish guy and Biden was just an old man. You see, with the Democratic Party's representatives on the table, America just looks easy to push around. But America isn't the same now. Trump or whoever, Hagel, Sessions, Rubio, or Trump himself, these guys are totally different from Blinken and Biden. They're two completely different situations. So if back then America had elected someone like Harris or Warren, and then next time picked someone like AOC, that would really be the beginning of the end for America. So as Gao Si said earlier, when it comes to maintaining world peace today, sorry, but it's still only you, Big Brother Trump. But is Trump really the American leader that the Japanese like the most, the one they'd most prefer? Definitely not. Because Japanese people are very refined and reserved. Their style is very elegant, so they probably can't really handle someone like him. Trump's style is like that, but in today's world, sorry, besides Trump, who else is there? For those who hate Trump and criticize him, you have to give an explanation, right? But they can't give a real explanation. So when you have to choose between two evils, that's all there is to say. You can only go with Trump.